The first snow came early that year, drifting down from the Wyoming mountains like ash from some distant fire. Elias Morgan stood at the edge of his rough-hewn porch, watching the flakes settle on the pine boughs, counting another winter beginning. His 10th winter alone. The cabin sat perched on a ridge overlooking a valley that few men had seen, and fewer still had lived to tell about. Elias had built it with his own hands, felling the timber, notching the logs, chinking the gaps with mud and moss until it stood solid against the mountain winds. It wasn't much. One room with a stone fireplace, a bed frame he'd lashed together with rawhide, shelves for his meager supplies. But it was enough. More than enough for a man who wanted nothing from the world except to be left alone. He pulled his wool coat tighter and went to check on the goats. 5 of them. Hardy mountain breeds that could survive on scrub brush and tree bark when the snow got deep. They bleated at his approach, their breath steaming in the cold air. He tossed them some hay he'd cut and dried during the brief mountain summer, then broke the ice on their water trough with the butt of his rifle. The rifle never left his side. Not because he feared men. Few came this far into the mountains, and those who did were usually running from something themselves. But because the wilderness demanded respect. Bears, wolves, mountain cats. A man alone couldn't afford to be careless. Inside the cabin, he stirred the embers in the fireplace and added a log. The flames caught, casting dancing shadows on the walls where his few possessions hung. Traps, snowshoes, a dented coffee pot, and a photograph in a tarnished frame that he never looked at directly anymore. He'd turned it to face the wall 3 winters ago, but couldn't bring himself to take it down entirely. Elias heated some beans and salt pork, the same meal he'd eaten for more days than he cared to count. As he ate, he could hear the wind picking up outside, rattling the shutters he'd reinforced with strips of leather. A real storm was coming. He could feel it in his bones, the same bones that still ached where Confederate grape shot had torn through his leg at Chickamauga. After supper, he sat by the fire and worked on mending a trap that had been sprung by a clever fox. His hands moved automatically, years of practice guiding them while his mind wandered. It always wandered on nights like this, when the snow fell heavy and the world shrank down to just the circle of firelight. He thought about that letter, the one he'd written over a year ago in a moment of weakness, whiskey-fueled loneliness that had made him believe he might want company again. A matrimonial advertisement, they called it. He'd even gone so far as to ride down to Laramie and pay to have it printed in one of those newspapers that specialized in such things. But he'd never sent the follow-up, never responded to any replies that might have come. What woman would want this life? What woman would want him, scarred, silent, carrying ghosts that woke him screaming some nights? The war had ended 15 years ago, but for men like Elias, it never really ended. It just followed them home, settling into their bones like winter cold. He'd tried to go back to Ohio after Appomattox, tried to pick up the threads of his old life, but Martha had taken sick with the yellow fever that swept through in '67, and little Sarah. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the trap in his hands. Sarah would have been 17 now, almost a woman grown, maybe married, with children of her own. But the fever had taken her 2 days after her mother, and Elias had buried them both in the small cemetery outside Columbus before selling everything he owned and heading west, as far west as a man could go without falling off the edge of the world. The wind howled louder now, and snow began to seep through the cracks around the door. Elias got up to stuff rags into the gaps, a nightly ritual when the storms came. He'd need to cut more firewood tomorrow, assuming the snow let up enough to work. His wood pile was getting low, and winter had barely started. He was just settling back by the fire when he heard it, or thought he did. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. He froze, listening. There it was again, a soft thump, like something falling against the door. Probably just a branch, he told himself, or an animal seeking shelter. But his hand found the rifle anyway, and he approached the door cautiously. In 10 years, he'd had maybe a dozen visitors, mostly trappers or prospectors who'd gotten lost. Once, a band of Arapaho had camped in the valley below, but they'd moved on without ever climbing to his ridge. He lifted the bar and cracked the door open, rifle ready. The wind tried to tear it from his hands, driving snow into his face. He squinted into the white darkness, seeing nothing at first. Then he looked down. A body lay crumpled on his doorstep. Small, covered in snow. So still it might have been a pile of rags except for the pale hand stretched out toward his door. A woman's hand, bare and already turning blue with cold. For a moment, Elias just stared, his mind refusing to make sense of what he was seeing. A woman. Here. Impossible. The nearest town was 3 days' ride in good weather. And this storm. Then training kicked in. The same instincts that had kept him alive through 4 years of war. He slung the rifle over his shoulder and knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face. Young, maybe 25, with dark hair frozen to her cheeks. Her lips were blue, but when he pressed fingers to her neck, he felt a pulse, weak, thready. But there, her feet were bare feet in a Wyoming snowstorm. The sight of those small, bloody feet shocked him into action. He gathered her up. She weighed almost nothing, just skin and bones wrapped in a thin dress and a shawl that wouldn't keep a dog warm, and carried her inside. He laid her on his bed, the first person besides himself to touch it in 10 years. Her skin was like ice, and when he pulled off the snow-crusted shawl, he could see her fingernails were purple with cold. Hypothermia. He'd seen it before. Men who'd fallen asleep on watch and never woken up. Working quickly, he stoked the fire until it roared, then filled every pot he'd had with snow to melt for warm water. He rubbed her hands and feet, trying to get blood flowing again, wincing at the cuts and bruises on her soles. How far had she walked like this? How was she even alive? He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then sat beside the bed and continued rubbing her feet, the way he'd done for soldiers who'd marched through winter slush until their feet went numb. She moaned once, her eyelids fluttering, but didn't wake. As the cabin warmed and her color slowly returned from blue to pale pink, Elias found himself studying her face. Not beautiful in the conventional sense. Her nose was a little crooked, like it had been broken once, and her cheekbones were too sharp from hunger. But there was something about her that held his attention, a stubbornness in the set of her jaw, maybe, or the way her hands, even unconscious, had curled into fists. The storm raged on outside, sealing them in together. Elias kept vigil through the night, feeding the fire, checking her breathing, wondering who she was and how she'd found his cabin. No one came here by accident. You had to know where you were going, had to want to find this place. As dawn broke gray and still stormy, she stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they fixed on his face. They were green, the color of sagebrush in summer. "Are you Elias Morgan?" she whispered, her voice cracked and hoarse. The question hit him like a physical blow. No one had spoken his name in years. He'd almost forgotten the sound of it. "How do you know that name?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. She tried to sit up, failed, and fell back against the blankets. But her eyes never left his face. "The letter," she said. "You wrote a letter." The letter? Of course it was the letter. Elias stared at the woman in his bed, trying to reconcile the reality of her presence with the foolish impulse that had driven him to write those words over a year ago. He'd been drunk on whiskey and loneliness, had penned the advertisement in a moment of weakness he'd regretted come morning. "That was a long time ago," he said finally. "I never sent word for anyone to come." She closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she'd drifted back to sleep. Then she spoke again, each word seeming to cost her effort. "The newspaper? They held it for months. Said sometimes men change their minds. Come back, I saw it 3 weeks ago." A ghost of a smile touched her cracked lips. Seemed like fate. 3 weeks. She'd been traveling 3 weeks to reach him, through country that would challenge a seasoned mountain man, in a dress and bare feet. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara. Clara Hensley." She opened her eyes again, studying him with an intensity that made him want to look away. "You look different than I imagined." "How did you imagine me?" "Younger, less." She gestured weakly at his face, and he knew she meant the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, souvenir of a cavalry saber at Shiloh. You should have stayed where you were, he said, more harshly than he intended. This is no place for a woman. When the storm clears, I'll take you back to town. No. The word came out firm despite her weakness. I can't go back. There's nothing for me there. Nothing for me anywhere except... She trailed off, her eyes sliding away from his. Elias rose and went to the fire, adding another log he didn't need. Buying time to think. He could feel her watching him. This stranger who'd walked through hell to find him based on a letter he wished he'd never written. You need food, he said, because it was easier than addressing what she'd left unsaid. When's the last time you ate? 2 days, maybe 3. I had some hardtack, but it ran out. He heated some broth from the rabbit he'd caught yesterday, thinning it down so her stomach could handle it. She struggled to sit up when he brought it to her, and he had to help, his hands awkward and uncertain as he propped her against the wall. I can manage, she said, but her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped the cup. He steadied it for her, helping her drink, trying not to think about how long it had been since he'd been this close to another person. She smelled of snow and pine, and something else, something that made him think of Martha's lavender soap. Why were you barefoot? He asked. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, my shoes fell apart 5 days ago. I tried to wrap my feet in fabric torn from my petticoat, but the snow... She shrugged, a tiny movement. I told myself it wasn't much farther. The man at the trading post said you lived at the tree line, where the bald mountain meets the forest. Old Pete sent you? Elias couldn't hide his surprise. The trading post was 40 miles away, and Pete had never mentioned his location to anyone, as far as he knew. He didn't want to. Said you were particular about your privacy, but I... She paused, seeming to gather strength. I showed him the letter, told him I was your intended. He believed me. You lied to him. Did I? She met his eyes directly. You wrote seeking a wife. I came. Just because you changed your mind doesn't make me a liar. He didn't know how to respond to that, so he helped her finish the broth instead. When she was done, she leaned back, exhaustion clear in every line of her body. But she didn't close her eyes. I'm not what you were expecting. She said, it wasn't a question. I wasn't expecting anyone. But when you wrote that letter, you had a picture in your mind. A proper lady, maybe someone gentle and refined, not someone like... She gestured at herself. Elias looked at her. Really looked. The torn dress, mended so many times the original fabric was hard to determine. The calluses on her hands that spoke of hard work. The way she held herself, even weak as she was, like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. What are you running from? He asked quietly. Her jaw tightened. What makes you think I'm running? Nobody walks 3 weeks through winter mountains because they're running towards something. They only do it when what's behind them is worse than freezing to death. She was quiet for a long time, and he thought she might not answer. The wind howled outside, driving snow against the walls with a sound like sand. I was a housemaid, she said finally. In Missouri, the family, the man of the house, he... She stopped, took a breath. When his wife found out, she blamed me, said I was a temptress, a Jezebel. They turned me out without references, without pay. No one would hire me after that. So I did what women do when they have no choices left. Her voice went flat. I survived. Elias knew what she meant without her having to say it. The territories were full of women who'd been forced into that life by circumstance and desperation. That's not your concern, she added quickly, misreading his silence. I'm not. I left that behind. I've been traveling honest for 3 weeks, working for meals when I could, to get here, to start over. Sss, you don't know anything about me, he said. I could be worse than what you left behind. Are you? He thought about the men he'd killed in the war, about the screams that still woke him some nights, about Martha and Sarah in the ground, and how he'd failed to save them. About 10 years of silence and solitude that had made him more ghost than man. "I don't know," he said honestly. She nodded as if this answer satisfied her more than reassurance would have. "At least you're honest. The letter was honest too. That's why I came." "What did it say?" He genuinely couldn't remember the details, just the whiskey haze and the desperate loneliness that had driven him to write it. Clara closed her eyes, reciting from memory. "Seeking a woman of practical disposition and hardy constitution for matrimony. I am a man of 37 years, possessed of a cabin and land in Wyoming territory. I have no fortune to offer, only an honest life far from civilization's reach. Seek no romance or soft living. Winters are hard and summers brief, but for a woman who values solitude and honest work, I can promise a roof that doesn't leak and food enough for two. I am not a drinking man except in memory's darkest hours. I have all my teeth and most of my soul. If you can make bread from poor flour and mend what's broken, if you can abide silence and need no society but your own thoughts, write to me, E. Morgan, Laramie Post." Elias felt heat rise in his face. Had he really written that? Most of my soul? It was the most honest matrimonial advertisement I'd ever seen. Clara continued, opening her eyes. No promises of wealth or adventure. No lies about being a prosperous rancher or businessman. Just a lonely man looking for someone who understood loneliness. "And you thought you were that someone?" "I thought we might understand each other. Two people who've learned to live with ghosts." The word hung between them. Ghosts. Yes, he lived with ghosts. And looking at her, at the shadows behind her eyes, he knew she did too. "You need rest," he said, standing abruptly. "Storm's not letting up. You're stuck here for now. But when it clears, you'll send me away." She nodded, unsurprised. "At least I'll have seen the mountains. They're beautiful, even in winter. Worth the walk." He didn't know what to say to that, so he busied himself around the cabin, checking the supplies, adding wood to the fire. Anything to avoid looking at her. But he could feel her presence like a change in barometric pressure, disturbing the careful equilibrium of his solitude. "There's a lean-to attached to the back," he said finally. "I use it for storage, but I can clear it out, make you a space until—" "Thank you," she interrupted. "That's kind of you." He gathered some tools and went out through the back door into the lean-to, grateful for the excuse to escape. The space was cramped and full of pelts, preserved meat and winter supplies, but he could make it habitable. Physical work was good. It kept him from thinking too much about the woman in his bed, about the letter he'd written, about the way she'd spoken of ghosts like she could see right through him. The storm continued through the day and into another night. Clara slept fitfully, crying out sometimes in her dreams. Elias found himself sitting beside the bed again, watching her breathe, wondering what nightmares chased her even here, at the end of the world. When she woke near midnight, she found him reading by candlelight, the Bible, the only book he owned. Though he read it more from habit than faith these days. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Storm's loud." "It's not the storm." He set the book aside. "You always this direct? Life's too short for anything else." She struggled to sit up, and he helped her again, trying not to notice how natural it felt. "Can I ask you something?" "Suppose so." "Who were they, the ones you lost?" His throat closed up, the way it always did when he tried to talk about them. But something about the darkness, the storm, her patient silence, made the words come easier than usual. "My wife, Martha, my daughter, Sarah. Fever took them in 67. How old was Sarah?" 6, would have been 17 now. Clara nodded slowly. "I lost a baby once, never got to name her. The family I worked for wouldn't pay for a doctor." She looked down at her hands. "That was before, when I still thought I had choices." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind. Then Clara said, "I won't be a burden. I can work, cook, clean, tend animals. I'm stronger than I look, when I'm not half frozen." "This isn't a life for a woman," Elias said. "The nearest neighbor is 50 miles. Town's a 3-day ride. In winter, We might be snowed in for weeks at a time. You'd go mad from the isolation." "Would I?" She looked around the cabin, taking in the neat shelves, the clean floor, everything in its place. "Seems to me you've made a good life here. Quiet, maybe. Lonely. Certainly, but honest. Clean." She met his eyes. "I've been in rooms full of people and felt more alone than I do right now." Something twisted in Elias's chest, a feeling he'd thought frozen out of him years ago. He stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the candle. "Get some rest," he said roughly. "We'll talk more when you're stronger." He retreated to his chair by the fire, but sleep didn't come. Instead, he sat watching the flames and thinking about bare feet in snow, about a woman who'd memorized his drunken letter, about the dangerous thaw he felt beginning somewhere deep inside his chest. He'd built his solitude like a fortress, brick by brick, year by year. Now this stranger had walked through his door, and already he could feel the walls beginning to crack. The storm broke on the third day, leaving behind a world transformed. Snow lay thick as a man's waist in the valleys, and the pines wore heavy white coats that bent their branches groundward. Elias stood on the porch, breathing air so cold it burned his lungs, watching the sun turn the mountains into diamonds. Behind him, he heard Clara moving about the cabin. She'd insisted on getting up that morning, despite his protests. "I've imposed enough," she'd said, wobbling to her feet like a newborn colt. "Time I earned my keep." He'd made the lean-to as comfortable as possible, swept it clean, laid down fresh pine boughs, strung up a blanket for privacy. But she'd slept there only one night before the cold drove her back to the main room. He'd given her the bed and taken the floor by the fire, telling himself it was temporary, just until she was strong enough to travel. That had been 2 weeks ago. Now she moved around his cabin as if she'd always been there, though she was careful never to disturb his things without asking. She'd mended his clothes without being asked, patching holes he'd lived with for years. She'd scrubbed the years of bachelor grime from his cookpot until it shone. She'd even fashioned a pair of crude moccasins from rabbit hide, though she still went barefoot inside. "I told you," she'd said when he questioned it. "I like to feel the ground. Reminds me I'm alive." He'd taught her how to set snares for rabbits, how to read the weather and the way the clouds clung to the peaks. She learned quickly, asking few questions but watching everything with those sharp green eyes. Sometimes he caught her looking at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, studying him like she was trying to solve a puzzle. The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings they worked separately, him tending the goats and checking his trap lines, her keeping the cabin and preparing meals from their simple stores. Afternoons they often worked together, cutting firewood or repairing gear. Evenings they sat by the fire, sometimes talking, more often silent. It was the silences that surprised him most. He'd lived alone so long he'd forgotten silence could be companionable rather than empty. Clara seemed to understand the value of quiet, when to speak and when to let the fire do the talking. One evening, as she darned one of his socks, she asked, "Why here? Of all the places you could have gone after everything, why this mountain?" Elias considered the question, whittling a new trap trigger. Came through here in '63, scouting for the army. Thought then it was the loneliest place I'd ever seen. After the war, after Martha and Sarah. He shrugged. Seemed like the right place for a man who wanted to disappear. "And did you disappear?" "Thought I had, until you showed up at my door." A smile ghosted across her face. "Sorry to ruin 10 years of perfectly good vanishing." "Are you?" The question hung between them. She set down her darning and looked at him directly. "No, I'm not sorry. Are you?" He should say yes. Should tell her again that come spring, he'd take her to town, put her on a stage headed somewhere civilized. Should maintain the walls he'd built so carefully. Instead, he found himself saying, "No, not sorry." The admission seemed to shift something in the air between them. Clara returned to her sewing, but there was a softness to her expression he hadn't seen before. Elias went back to his whittling, but his hands weren't quite steady. 2 days later, He was skinning a deer when she came to watch. Usually, she avoided the messier aspects of his work, but this time she stood close, observing his knife work. "Teach me," she said. "It's not pleasant work for a woman. Neither was my life before. Teach me." So he did, showing her how to make the cuts, how to separate hide from meat without wasting anything. Her hands were steady, and she didn't flinch from the blood. When they were done, she helped him stretch the hide for curing, her movements becoming more confident with each task. "You're different than I expected," he said as they washed the blood from their hands in snowmelt. "How so?" "Stronger. Most women would have run screaming from this life by now. Most women haven't lived my life." She dried her hands on her apron, another thing she'd made from scraps. "Besides, you're different than you think you are." "What does that mean?" "You think you're some hard man, dead inside, no good for anyone. But you took in a stranger. You gave up your bed. You teach me things without making me feel foolish for not knowing them." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "You're gentle with the goats. You talk to them sometimes when you think I can't hear." Heat rose in his face. "They're good listeners." "So am I." That night, as had become their custom, they sat by the fire after supper. Clara was teaching herself to knit with yarn she'd unraveled from an old scarf, while Elias sharpened his tools. The domestic scene struck him suddenly. How normal it felt. How dangerous that normality was. "Tell me about before," he said abruptly. "Your childhood. Before everything." Clara's hands stilled. "Not much to tell. Farm in Indiana, 7 children, me in the middle. Father drank, mother prayed. We were poor as Job's turkey." She resumed knitting, the needles clicking softly. "I left when I was 14. Figured I'd rather work for strangers who'd pay me than family who wouldn't." "That how you ended up in Missouri?" "Eventually. Worked my way south, house by house. Thought I was smart, choosing the big fancy homes. They'd have standards. I thought, rules. Protection for their workers." Her laugh was bitter. "Turns out rich men just hide their cruelty better." Elias wanted to ask more, but sensed he'd pushed far enough. "Instead," he said, "I grew up on a farm too. Ohio, nothing fancy. But we ate regular. My father was a good man. Strict but fair. Were you happy? Before the war?" "I thought I was. Had Martha. Had the farm. When Sarah came along." He had to stop, the memory too sharp, even after all these years. "Yeah, I was happy." "That's good," Clara said softly. "That you had that, some people never do." They lapsed into silence again, but he could feel questions radiating from her. Finally, she asked, "Do you ever think about going back? To Ohio?" "Nothing to go back to. Sold the farm. Martha's family blamed me for their deaths. Said I should have done more. Gotten the doctor sooner." The old anger rose, mixed with guilt because maybe they were right. "What about you? Family in Indiana?" "None that would claim me now." She held up her knitting, examining it in the firelight. "Dropped a stitch. Have to unravel it and start over." She began pulling the yarn loose, undoing hours of work without frustration. "Sometimes I think that's all life is, dropping stitches and starting over." Christmas came, though they didn't acknowledge it beyond Elias bringing in a particularly fat rabbit for dinner. Clara surprised him with a pair of mittens she'd knitted in secret, working on them in the lean-to at night. "They're not much," she said, almost shy as she handed them over. "But your old ones have more holes than fabric." He turned them over in his hands, marveling at the even stitches, the careful work. No one had given him a gift in 10 years. "They're fine," he managed. Real fine. He had nothing to give her in return, but that evening he brought out the small store of coffee he'd been hoarding and made a pot. Her face when she smelled it brewing was better than any thank you. "Real coffee," she breathed, cradling the tin cup like it held liquid gold. "I'd almost forgotten what it tasted like." They drank it slowly, savoring each sip. And for the first time, Elias told her about the war. Not the battles or the glory-seeking fools who'd led them, but the small things. The boy from Georgia who'd died calling for his mother. the time they'd called a truce to pull wounded from between the lines. The morning at Antietam when the cornfield turned red. Clara listened without interrupting, without offering platitudes. When he finally ran out of words, she said simply, "That's a heavy load to carry alone. Been carrying it so long I forgot it was heavy. Maybe that's what I'm here for, to help carry it." He looked at her across the fire. This woman who'd walked barefoot through winter to find him. "That's not why you came." "No," she agreed, "but maybe it's why I stayed." The next morning brought fresh snow, and with it a decision. They were running low on supplies. Flour, salt, ammunition. Elias would need to make the trip to the trading post. 3 days there and back if the weather held. "I'll come with you," Clara said when he told her. "Trail's rough. Better you stay here. And if something happens to you, if your horse throws you or you get caught in a storm." She shook her head. "I'm coming." He could have argued, but the truth was he didn't want to leave her alone, didn't want to be alone himself. Not anymore. The realization shook him more than he cared to admit. They prepared for 2 days. Clara fashioning warmer clothes from pelts and blankets, while Elias reinforced her moccasins with thicker soles. The morning they left dawned clear and bitter cold, the kind of day when the air itself seemed to crystallize. Clara rode behind him on the sturdy mountain pony he'd traded for 2 years back, her arms around his waist for balance. The intimacy of it, her warmth against his back, her breath misting past his ear, made him grateful for the cold that gave him excuse for his burning face. They made good time the first day, following ridges where the wind had blown the snow thin. That night they camped in a grove of aspens, sharing the single bedroll for warmth while the horses stood hobbled nearby. Clara curled against him like it was the most natural thing in the world, and Elias lay awake long after her breathing deepened, wondering how his carefully ordered life had come to this. On the second day, they met another traveler coming up the trail, a trapper Elias knew by sight, a grizzled Frenchman named Dubois. The man's eyes widened, seeing Clara. "Morgan, I hear stories you have died up there, frozen solid like a statue. But no, you have found yourself a woman." "My wife," Elias said without thinking, and felt Clara's arms tighten around him. "Wife!" "When did this miracle occur?" "Recent," Clara said from behind him. "Very recent." Dubois laughed, a booming sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "The hermit of the mountain takes a wife. The world is full of surprises." "No?" They shared a meal with the trapper, who was full of news from the lower valleys. Railroad pushing west, Indians being forced onto reservations, a new silver strike in Colorado drawing men like flies to honey. Elias found himself caring little for any of it. His world had shrunk to the mountain, the cabin, and the woman who sat beside him. Charming stories out of Dubois about his travels. When they parted ways, the Frenchman winked at Elias. "You chose well, my friend. A woman who can smile after riding these mountains in winter. She is worth keeping." Yes, they reached the trading post late on the second day. Old Pete's eyebrows climbed to his hairline seeing them together, but he said nothing beyond, "So you found her then?" "She found me," Elias corrected. They resupplied quickly. Elias had no desire to linger where questions might be asked. Clara had a short list of her own: needles, thread, a small mirror, and something that surprised him, a cake of lye soap for making proper soap. She explained, "If we render that deer fat right, I can make enough to last months." The word lodged in his chest like a splinter. "That night in the rough shelter behind the trading post," she said quietly. "Thank you for what you told Dubois. Seemed simpler than explaining. Is that the only reason?" He didn't answer, couldn't answer. Instead, he pulled the blanket higher over them both and pretended to sleep, but he felt her smile against his shoulder. And that was answer enough. The trip back was harder, clouds building over the peaks promising another storm. They pushed the pace, both of them anxious to reach the cabin before the weather turned. When they finally crested the last ridge and saw the cabin below, smoke still trickling from the chimney, Clara let out a breath he didn't know she'd been holding. "What?" he asked. I was afraid it might have been a dream, that we'd get here and there'd be nothing but snow and rocks. It's real enough. Yes, she said, and he heard layers of meaning in the word. It is. That night, safe in the cabin with new supplies stacked on the shelves and the storm beginning to howl outside, Clara stood from her place by the fire and crossed to where Elias sat mending harness. I need to tell you something, she said, his hand stilled, dread pooling in his stomach. Here it was, the thing she'd been hiding, the reason she'd really come. I wasn't completely honest before, about my past. Oh, she took a breath, squared her shoulders. The man in Missouri, my employer, when his wife found out about his attentions to me, she didn't just turn me out. Her hands clenched in her skirts. She had me arrested, said I'd stolen from them. I hadn't, but who'd believe a servant over a respectable family? Clara, I spent 6 months in prison, 6 months for a crime I didn't commit, locked up with women who'd done things I couldn't imagine. When I got out, I had nothing. No references, no money, no place to go. That's when I did what I had to do to survive. She stood straight, chin up, waiting for his judgment. Elias set down the harness and stood, moving close but not touching. Is that everything? Everything that matters? He studied her face. This woman who'd walked through hell and come out the other side still standing. All right then. All right? You think I care what some rich folks in Missouri thought? You think I don't know the law's different for people like them and people like us? He shook his head. You're here now. That's what matters. Tears gathered in her eyes but didn't fall. I was afraid. I told you when you first came. We all got ghosts. Question is whether we let them rule us or not. She reached out then, touching his face, her fingers tracing the scar. How'd you really get this? Cavalry saber at Shiloh. Boy couldn't have been more than 16. I can still see his face sometimes. Do you regret it? Regret staying alive? No, regret that he didn't. Every day. She nodded like this made perfect sense. Then, so naturally he didn't have time to think. She rose on her toes and kissed the scar, a touch light as snow. What was that for? His voice came out rougher than intended. For staying alive. She said simply, so you could be here when I needed to find you. Spring came late to the mountains that year, creeping up the valleys like a cautious animal. The snow began its slow retreat, revealing the brown earth beneath, and the first green shoots pushed through where the sun hit strongest. Elias found himself watching for these signs with more attention than usual, aware that with spring came choices that winter had postponed. Clara had settled into the life like she'd been born to it. She'd learned to read the moods of the weather, to stretch their supplies with clever cooking, to move through the forest quiet as smoke. The goats followed her now like she was their mother. And she'd even named them, despite Elias's protests that naming animals you might have to eat was foolishness. Everything needs a name, she'd said. Otherwise, how do you know it matters? They'd fallen into routines that felt dangerous in their domesticity. She'd taken over the cooking entirely after discovering his idea of seasoning was salt, if they had it. Nothing if they didn't. He'd built her a proper bed in the lean-to, though she still spent the coldest nights by the main fire. They worked together now with an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's movements like dancers who'd rehearsed for years. It was this very ease that made him restless. 10 years he'd lived here without needing anyone, and now he found himself looking for her when she wasn't in sight, listening for her humming as she worked. It was weakness, he told himself, softness that would get them both killed when trouble came. And trouble always came. The first sign was tracks in the mud near the creek, boot prints that weren't his, too large to be Clara's. Someone had been watching the cabin. Elias didn't tell her, but he started wearing his pistol even for short trips to the wood pile, and he moved his rifle to hang closer to the door. The second sign came a week later when old Dubois appeared on their doorstep, his usual jovial manner replaced by worried urgency. Morgan, my friend, I come with news you will not like. Elias invited him in, noting how the trapper's eyes kept flicking to Clara as she served coffee. When she moved to leave them to talk, Dubois stopped her. "No, madam, this concerns you also. Men in town, they ask questions about a woman who may have come this way. They show papers, speak of Missouri, of crimes." Clara's face went white, but her hands stayed steady. "How many men?" "3. They say they are hired by a family named Richardson. Say a woman stole from them, that she is dangerous." Dubois snorted. "I tell them I see no one, but others in town, they talk. Someone will remember seeing you at the trading post." "Richardson." Clara spoke the name like it tasted of poison. "His widow sent them. She always said she'd see me hang." "For theft?" Elias asked, though he suspected there was more. Clara met his eyes. "For murder. They're saying I killed him. Mr. Richardson." The silence in the cabin was absolute. Even the fire seemed to quiet its crackling. Dubois looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. "I should go," the trapper said finally. "But I tell you this, they are hard men, these hunters, not the kind to give up easy. Be careful, my friends." After he left, Clara stood staring at the closed door. "I didn't tell you because it wasn't true. He died, yes, but it was his heart. The doctor said so. He was attacking me when it happened. But his wife, she blamed me, said I'd excited him to death, that it was the same as murder. Clara, I'll leave." She turned to face him, her chin up though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Tonight, I'll take some supplies and, no, Elias, you don't understand. These men, if they find me here, they'll—" I said no. He crossed to her in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. "You're not running anymore. But you're my wife, remember? That's what I told Dubois. What we told everyone at the trading post. My wife doesn't run from anyone." "We're not really, aren't we?" The question hung between them, heavy as mountain snow. "You've been living as my wife for months now. Cooking my food, mending my clothes, sharing my fire. Only thing missing is the words said over us. And those are just for other people anyway." Clara searched his face. "You'd stand with me against these men? Risk everything you've built here?" "Already risked it the night I brought you in from the snow. Been risking it every day since." He released her shoulders, stepped back. "But it's your choice. You want to run? I'll give you supplies, money, whatever you need. You want to stay and fight? Then we fight together." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm tired of running." "Then we'd best prepare for visitors." They spent the next days making ready. Elias cleaned and loaded every weapon he owned, positioning them strategically around the cabin. He taught Clara to shoot. She was a quick study, her hands steady despite never having held a gun before. They laid in extra water, moved the goats to a hidden corral further up the mountain, cached supplies in case they had to flee. But mostly they waited, nerves stretching tighter with each passing day. Clara barely slept, starting at every sound. Elias found himself watching her constantly, memorizing her face like he might need to recall it later. 3 days after Dubois' warning, Elias was checking his trap line when he saw them, 3 riders picking their way up the trail. He ghosted back to the cabin, staying to cover, and found Clara outside taking in laundry. "Inside," he said quietly. "They're coming." She didn't panic, just gathered the last of the clothes and followed him. Inside, they took their positions. Clara by the back window with the shotgun, Elias by the door with his rifle. "Remember," he said, "let me do the talking. Only shoot if I shoot first." She nodded, face pale but determined. The riders came into the clearing slowly, spreading out in a half circle. Professional manhunters. Elias could see it in the way they moved. The one in the center, a thin man with dead eyes, called out, "Hello, the cabin. Looking for somebody. Like to ask you some questions." Elias opened the door, rifle casual in his hands. "Ask from there." The thin man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Now that's not very neighborly. We've come a long way." "Then you can go a long way back. This is private property." "Mr. Morgan, isn't it?" Heard about you in town. The hermit of the mountain. The man's eyes flicked past Elias, trying to see inside. Also heard you recently took a wife. Like to meet her. She's shy of strangers. I'll bet she is. The smile widened. See, we're looking for a woman. Murderess from Missouri. Killed her employer in cold blood. Stole from his family. Dangerous woman. About yet tall. Dark hair. Green eyes. Ring any bells? No. You sure about that? Because funny thing, description matches what folks in town say about your new bride. Folks in town talk too much. The man shifted in his saddle, and Elias saw him ease his coat back from his pistol. The other two followed suit. Here's the thing, Morgan, we're taking that woman back to Missouri. Now, you can make this easy. Send her out, and we'll be on our way. Or you can make it hard, and we'll still take her, just over your dead body. Your choice. From behind him, Elias heard Clara chamber around in the shotgun. The sound carried in the still air, and the riders tensed. Sounds like the lady's made her choice. Elias said, Now I'll make mine. Get off my land. Can't do that. Then you'll be buried on it. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then the thin man laughed. An ugly sound. 3 against 1? You sure you've thought this through? 3 against 2. Clara's voice came clear from inside. And this scattergun doesn't need much aiming. The thin man's eyes narrowed. That you, Clara? Mrs. Richardson sends her regards. Says she won't rest until you're dancing at rope's end. Mrs. Richardson can go to hell. Clara called back. And so can you. Tough talk for a whore who killed a good man. Elias felt rather than saw Clara flinch at the words. His finger found the trigger. That's my wife you're speaking to, he said quietly. Choose your next words careful. They might be your last. The tension stretched tighter, a bowstring ready to snap. Then one of the other riders, younger than the rest, spoke up. Boss, maybe we should come back with more men. Man's got the high ground and cover. The thin man's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. Finally, he nodded. This isn't over. Morgan, we'll be back, and we'll bring the law with us if we have to. You do that. Sheriff from town knows me. Known me for years. You think he's going to believe some strangers from Missouri over a man's lived peaceful here for a decade? It was a bluff. Elias had met the sheriff exactly twice, but the doubt it put in the thin man's eyes was worth it. We'll see about that, the man said. One way or another, that woman's coming back with us. Count on it. They wheeled their horses and rode out, but Elias kept his rifle trained on them until they disappeared into the trees. Only then did he step back inside, closing and barring the door. Clara stood by the window still, shotgun shaking in her hands. When she saw him, she set it carefully aside and promptly burst into tears. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. I brought this to your door. I should never have come here. He crossed to her, gathered her into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against him, crying like her heart would break. Shh, he said, stroking her hair. It's all right. It's not all right. They'll come back. They'll bring more men. Then we'll face them when they do. She pulled back to look at him, eyes red and swollen. Why? Why are you doing this for me? The answer came without thought. Because I love you. The words hung between them, surprising them both. Clara's eyes widened, searching his face. You, what? I love you, he said again, more certain now. Didn't mean to, didn't want to, but there it is. Elias, I know it's not what you came looking for. No, you were just looking for a safe place, not another complication, but... She stopped his words with a kiss, fierce and desperate. When she pulled back, she was crying again, but differently now. You impossible man, she whispered. I've loved you since the night you rubbed life back into my frozen feet. Maybe before that. Maybe I loved you from reading that honest, lonely letter. He kissed her again, tasting salt and hope and fear all mingled together. When they broke apart, reality crashed back in. They will come back, Clara said. With more men, like they said. I know. We can't fight them all. I know that too. She touched his face, fingers gentle on the old scar. I won't let you die for me. And I won't let them take you. Seems we're at an impasse. A smile ghosted across her face. Then what do we do? Elias looked around the cabin that had been his refuge for 10 years. Every log, every stone, every carefully crafted piece of furniture represented his retreat from the world, his attempt to bury his heart with his family. But hearts, it seemed, didn't stay buried. We run, he said. Together. Head north into Canada, maybe, or west to Oregon. Somewhere they won't follow. You'd leave this place? Everything you built? I built this place to hide from living. You brought life back to it. To me. He cupped her face in his hands. A cabin can be rebuilt anywhere. But you I can't replace. She covered his hands with hers. When do we leave? Tonight. Soon as it's full dark. We'll take the horses. What supplies we can carry. Head over the North Pass. I know trails they'll never find. They spent the remaining daylight preparing, packing only essentials. Clara insisted on leaving the cabin clean and tidy, as if they were only stepping out for a while. She left a note on the table. For whoever needs shelter, be welcome. As darkness fell, they loaded the horses. The goats they'd have to leave behind. Elias opened their pen, knowing they'd either find their way to lower pastures or provide food for the wolves. Either way, it was the way of the mountain. Clara stood in the doorway, taking one last look at the place that had become home. Will we ever have this again? This peace? We'll have better. Elias promised. We'll have it without looking over our shoulders. She nodded and stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind her. They mounted up, Clara on her own horse now, dressed in men's clothes for easier travel. As they rode away, she didn't look back, but Elias did, seeing his cabin fade into the darkness like a dream ending. At the tree line, she reached over and took his hand. No regrets. None, he said, and meant it. You? Only that I didn't find you sooner. They rode on into the night, into uncertainty, into a future neither could predict. Behind them, the cabin stood empty, a monument to solitude overcome by love, and somewhere in those dark woods, 3 men made camp and planned their next move, never knowing their quarry was already gone, vanished into the vast wilderness like smoke on the wind. But that was tomorrow's worry. Tonight, there was only the rhythm of hoofbeats on stone, the whisper of wind through pine, and 2 people who'd found each other at the end of the world, riding toward whatever came next, together. They rode through the night, following deer trails and creek beds, moving always upward into country that grew wilder with each mile. The moon gave enough light to navigate by, and Elias knew these mountains like the lines on his own hands. By dawn, they'd put 15 miles between themselves and the cabin. Clara rode without complaint, though he could see exhaustion in the slump of her shoulders. When the sun finally crested the peaks, painting the snow gold and pink, he called a halt in a grove of aspens by a small spring. We'll rest here a few hours, he said, helping her down from her horse. Horses need water, and so do we. She nodded, stretching stiff muscles. How far to the pass? 2 more days if we push, 3 if we're careful. They'll find the cabin empty today. Let them. By the time they figure which way we went, we'll be over the divide. They made a cold camp, no fire that might give away their position. Clara unpacked some of the food she'd prepared. Hard biscuits, dried meat, a precious handful of dried apples. They ate in silence, listening to the forest wake around them. I keep thinking I should feel worse, Clara said finally. About leaving, about running again. But I don't. Nothing wrong with choosing life over pride. Is that what we're doing? She looked at him with those green eyes that seemed to see straight through him. Or are we choosing each other over everything else? Maybe they're the same thing. She smiled, the first real smile since Dubois had brought his warning. Maybe they are. They slept a few hours in turns, one always watching. When they rode on, the trail grew steeper, the air thinner. Patches of snow lingered even in the sunny spots, and their breath came in visible puffs. That night they sheltered in a shallow cave Elias remembered from his trapping days. He risked a small fire, banking it carefully to hide the light. Clara sat close to him, their shoulders touching, sharing warmth. "Tell me about Oregon," she said. "What's it like?" "Never been myself, but I hear it's green, rains a lot. Good farming country if a man's inclined to farm." "Are you?" "Inclined." He considered it. "Might be, with the right partner." "Partners," she mused. "Is that what we are? Among other things." "What other things?" Instead of answering with words, he kissed her. She responded eagerly, months of careful distance evaporating in the face of their uncertain future. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, she laughed softly. "That's some answer. Best I've got." They made love there in the cave, on blankets spread over stone, with the fire dying to embers and the stars visible through the entrance. It was different from their careful couplings in the cabin, desperate and tender by turns, an affirmation of life in the face of danger. Afterward, Clara traced patterns on his chest, her fingers following old scars. "All these stories written on your skin," she murmured. "Will you tell them all to me someday? Got the rest of our lives for stories. Promise?" "Promise." But morning brought a harsh reminder that promises were fragile things. Elias woke to the sound of horses on the trail below. Too many to be anyone but their pursuers. He woke Clara with a hand over her mouth, finger to his lips. Her eyes went wide, but she nodded understanding. Moving silently, they gathered their things, smothered the dead fire, saddled the horses in the deeper darkness of the cave. Voices carried up from below. The thin man's distinctive drawl, "Trail's fresh, they came this way." "How'd they find us so fast?" Clara whispered. Elias cursed himself for underestimating them. "Must have a tracker. Indian, maybe, or someone who knows these mountains better than I thought." They led the horses out the back of the cave, where the trail continued upward. More goat path than proper trail. It was treacherous going in the early morning light. Loose rocks threatening to send them tumbling with each step. Behind them, shouts indicated their camp had been found. Elias urged more speed, though one misstep would be fatal. Clara followed, trusting his lead, her mare picking its way with surprising delicacy. They'd gained perhaps a quarter mile when the first shot rang out, the bullet whining off rocks to their left. Then more shots, wild but getting closer as the hunters found their range. "Ride!" Elias shouted, abandoning caution for speed. They burst from the narrow trail onto a wider path, horses stretching into a gallop. Trees whipped past, branches tearing at their clothes. More shots behind them, and shouts as their pursuers mounted up to give chase. The trail forked ahead, left toward the pass, right into a box canyon Elias knew was a dead end. But the right fork was wider, easier riding. An idea formed. "Stay left," he shouted to Clara. "No matter what." He wheeled his horse right, firing his rifle back down the trail to make sure the hunters saw him. As he'd hoped, they followed, assuming Clara would stay with him. The canyon narrowed ahead, walls rising sheer on both sides. Elias pushed his horse harder, looking for the spot he remembered. There, a crack in the rock, barely wide enough for a man on foot, invisible until you were right on it. He slid from the saddle, slapped his horse's rump to send it running on, and squeezed into the crack just as the first riders came into view, pressed deep in the shadows. He watched them thunder past, chasing his riderless horse. Soon they'd realize their mistake. He had minutes at most. Elias worked his way back through the crack, emerging at a run. On foot now, but that might be an advantage in this terrain. He cut across country, moving upslope at an angle that should intersect with Clara's path. He found her an hour later, leading both horses up a steep grade, tears streaming down her face. When she saw him, she dropped the reins and flew into his arms. "I thought they'd killed you," she sobbed. "I heard all that shooting and... Shh, I'm here. I'm all right." He held her tight, feeling her shake against him. "But we need to keep moving. They'll figure out the trick soon enough. Your horse came back. I caught him." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Stupid of me to cry. We don't have time." "Not stupid. Never stupid." He kissed her forehead. "Come on. I know another way." They pushed on, Elias now leading both horses while Clara rode, exhaustion finally claiming its due. The new route was harder, skirting the edge of a glacier field, but less likely to be found by trackers. By evening, they'd reached the tree line. Above them, the pass beckoned, a narrow notch between peaks, still choked with snow. They'd have to cross at night to avoid being seen against the white expanse. They made camp in the last cluster of stunted pines, risking no fire. Clara seemed to have aged years in the past day, her face drawn and pale. When Elias tried to give her extra food, she pushed it back. "We share," she said firmly. "Good times and bad, that's what partners do." They waited for full dark, dozing fitfully by turns. Elias dreamed of Martha and Sarah, but when they turned to look at him, they had Clara's green eyes. He woke with a start to find her watching him. "Bad dreams. Old ones. I dreamed we had a farm, chickens and everything. Silly, isn't it?" "No, not silly at all." When the moon rose, they started the final climb. The horses struggled in the deep snow, and soon Elias and Clara were walking too, leading them, breaking trail. The cold was bitter, wind cutting through their clothes like knives. Halfway up, Clara stumbled and fell. When Elias helped her up, her lips were blue. "Just need a moment," she gasped. "No stopping here. We stop, we freeze." He pulled her against him, sharing what warmth he had. "Little further. You can do this. Can't feel my feet. Then it's just like the night I found you, and look how that turned out." She laughed weakly. "Found myself a husband. And I found myself a wife. Now move those feet. Wife, we've got a farm to build." Step by agonizing step, they climbed. The pass seemed to recede with each forward movement, a cruel illusion of mountain distances. But finally, they crested the ridge. Before them, the world dropped away into darkness. Somewhere down there was the western slope. New country, a fresh start. Behind them, their past pursued on horseback, relentless and unforgiving. "It's beautiful," Clara breathed, looking at the stars spread above them like scattered diamonds. "You're beautiful," Elias said, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything. They began the descent, more dangerous than the climb with ice-slick rocks hidden under snow. Dawn found them below the snowline again, in a valley Elias had never seen before. A creek bubbled through it, and pines grew thick and green. "Look," Clara pointed. "In the meadow below, a herd of elk grazed peacefully. The animals raised their heads as the humans appeared, watched them for a moment, then returned to their breakfast, unafraid. They've never seen hunters," Elias realized. "We're beyond where men go." "Good," Clara said fiercely. "Let's go further still." They camped that morning by the creek, both too exhausted to continue. This time, Elias felt safe enough for a fire. They ate hot food for the first time in days, and Clara actually smiled as she sipped the coffee he'd hoarded for emergencies. "Tastes like civilization," she said. "That what you miss? Civilization?" "No." She looked at him over the tin cup. "I miss your cabin, though. Our cabin. The way the morning light came through that east window. The sound the goats made when they were happy. We'll build another, better, with a proper floor and real glass windows. And a door that doesn't stick? Let's not get carried away." They laughed, and for a moment it was possible to forget they were fugitives. Forget the hard miles still ahead. Forget everything but each other. That afternoon, clouds began building over the peaks behind them. Elias watched them with growing concern. "Storm coming," he said. "Big one from the look of it." "Will it slow them down?" "It'll slow everyone down, but it might cover our tracks too." They pushed on despite their exhaustion. Following the creek down valley, the trees grew taller, older, and game trails crisscrossed their path. This was good country. Elias thought. A man could live here, if he had reason to. By evening, the first snowflakes were falling. They found shelter under a massive fallen tree, its roots forming a natural windbreak. Elias cut pine boughs to seal the gaps while Clara tended the horses, speaking to them softly as she rubbed them down. "You're good with them," he observed. "They listen better than people sometimes." She patted the mare's neck. "Don't you, girl? You don't judge. You just carry on." The storm hit full force that night. Wind howled through the trees like a living thing, and snow fell so thick they couldn't see beyond their shelter. They huddled together, horses crowded close for warmth, and waited it out. "If we die here," Clara said during a lull, "I want you to know something. We're not dying here, but if we do, I want you to know that these months with you, they've been the best of my life. Even with all this, especially with all this." She found his hand in the darkness. "You gave me something I never had before." "What's that?" "A home, not just a place, a person who feels like home." He squeezed her hand, throat too tight for words. After a while, she spoke again. "What happened to them, the men chasing us? If they're smart, they turn back before the pass. If not," he shrugged, "the mountain takes what it wants. I should feel bad about that, hoping they're dead, but I don't. Nothing wrong with wanting to live. Is that what I want? Or do I want them to pay for making us run? Maybe both. Human nature's complicated that way." The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving 2 feet of fresh snow and a world transformed. They dug themselves out, fed the horses the last of the grain, and prepared to move on. But when Elias went to scout the trail ahead, he found something that stopped him cold. Tracks in the new snow. Human tracks, crossing their intended path. He studied them carefully. Not boots, moccasins, Indian sign, and fresh, a hunting party maybe, or scouts for a larger band. He returned to Clara, weighing their options, behind them. Maybe dead in the storm, maybe still coming. Ahead, unknown people who might help them or kill them or simply want nothing to do with 2 worn-out whites stumbling through their territory. "What do we do?" Clara asked when he told her. "We keep going," he said. "Same as always. But careful now. Very careful." They moved out slowly, Elias ridding the land for sign, Clara watching their back trail. Somewhere a raven called, harsh and mocking. The mountains pressed close around them, beautiful and terrible and utterly indifferent to their small human drama. But they were alive. They were together. And they were free. For now. That was enough. The Indian tracks led north, parallel to their route but not intersecting. Elias kept them moving west, every sense alert. Clara rode close behind, the pack horse between them, their few remaining supplies dwindling with each meal. On the 3rd day after the storm, they came upon signs of violence. A dead horse, arrows still protruding from its hide, scattered gear that looked familiar, canteens, saddlebags, a torn coat Elias recognized. "The hunters," Clara said quietly. Elias dismounted to examine the scene. Blood on the snow, now frozen pink, drag marks leading into the trees. The Indians had hit them fast, probably at dawn. No bodies meant captives or the dead had been carried off. "Should we feel relieved?" Clara asked, her voice strange. "Feel however you feel. Won't change what happened." She was quiet a moment. "I feel nothing. That frightens me more than feeling glad would. You're tired is all. Soul tired. Makes everything numb." They moved on quickly, not wanting to linger where death hung so fresh in the air. But now they had a new worry. The Indians were still out there, and they'd tasted blood. That night they made no fire, ate cold food, spoke in whispers. Elias dozed fitfully, rifle across his knees, starting at every sound. Near dawn, Clara touched his shoulder. "Someone's out there." He was instantly alert, listening. She was right. A presence in the darkness, felt more than heard. Slowly, he brought the rifle up, though shooting blind would only give away their position. A figure materialized from the shadows, an Indian warrior, painted for war. Arrow knocked but not drawn. He studied them for a long moment, then spoke in accented English. "You are not the ones we seek." Elias kept the rifle steady but didn't aim directly. "We're not seeking trouble either. The men who followed you, they brought trouble. They shot first." The warrior's eyes flicked to Clara. "This is your woman? My wife? She is the one they hunted? No point in lying." "Yes." The warrior considered this. "My chief says a woman who is hunted by bad men maybe is not bad herself, but maybe she brings bad luck to others. We're just passing through." Elias said, "Heading for the far valleys. Won't trouble your people. You are already trouble. You bring hunters to our land. The hunters are dead now. 3 are dead. 1 lives. He tells us many things." The warrior's smile was cold. "He says more will come, many more, for the woman." Clara spoke up then, surprising them both. "They might come, but not here. We're going far away, where they'll never think to look. Your people won't see us again." The warrior studied her. "You speak truth, but truth changes nothing. The one who lives, he must die. But after, his people will want blood for blood. This is the white man's way." "Then let us take him," Elias said suddenly. "We'll bring him to the settlements. Tell them he tried to kill us. No one need know your people were involved." "You would take this trouble on yourself?" "It's our trouble anyway." The warrior was silent for a long moment. Then, "Wait." He melted back into the forest. Elias and Clara sat frozen, hardly breathing. Time stretched like cold molasses. The warrior returned with others, 5 of them, moving silent as smoke. Between them, they dragged a figure that moaned and stumbled. Even in the dawn light, Elias recognized the thin man with dead eyes, though he looked considerably worse for wear. They dumped him at Elias's feet. The thin man looked up, face bloody and swollen, recognized Clara and tried to speak. Only a croak emerged. "He will live if tended," the warrior said. "What you do with him is your choice, but choose wisely. His death brings more death. Always." "We understand," Elias said. The Indians vanished as quickly as they'd come, leaving no trace but the broken man gasping in the snow. Clara dismounted, stood looking down at her tormentor. "Hello, mister." "Garrett," she said calmly. The thin man, Garrett, tried again to speak. This time words came, slurred and painful. "You, witch, knew I'd find you." "Yes, you found me. And look what it got you." She knelt beside him, and Elias tensed, not sure what she intended. "Tell me something. Mr. Garrett, did Mrs. Richardson pay you well to hunt me? Was it worth it?" "Whore!" He spat, though it cost him. "Murdered? Good man. He was attacking me when his heart gave out. You know that. She knows that. Everyone knows that." Clara's voice was steady as stone. "But it didn't matter, did it? I was nobody. Just a servant girl. Easy to blame. Should have hanged." "Yes, I suppose I should have. Would have made your job easier." She stood, looked at Elias. "What do we do with him?" It was a test, Elias realized. Of him, of them, of what kind of people they were going to be. The easy answer was a bullet, here where no one would know. The hard answer, we take him with us. Find a town with a sheriff, tell our side. He attacked us, we defended ourselves. That's the truth. They won't believe us. Clara said, "Maybe not, but we'll have tried to do right. That matters." Garrett laughed, a bubbling sound. "Noble, fool. They'll hang. You both." "Maybe," Elias agreed. "But we'll hang with clean consciences." They bound Garrett's wounds as best they could, tied him to the packhorse. He cursed them steadily but weakly as they traveled, his voice growing fainter as the day wore on. By afternoon, he'd lapsed into unconsciousness. "He's dying," Clara observed without emotion. "Probably. We could make camp, rest, try to save him." "We could." They rode on. An hour later, Garrett made a sound like a sigh and slumped forward. When Elias checked, he was gone. They buried him in a grove of aspens, marking the grave with stones, not for his sake, but for theirs. Clara said no words over him, but she stood quiet for a moment before mounting up. "Feel better?" Elias asked as they rode away. "I feel free, for the first time in my life. Truly free." She looked at him. "Does that make me a bad person?" "Makes you human." They came down out of the high country 2 days later, finding a wagon road that wound through easier valleys. The horses were worn to shadows, ribs showing despite their care. They needed rest, grain, proper shelter. They needed civilization, much as Elias hated to admit it. The first town they came to was barely that, a handful of buildings clustered around a sawmill. But it had what they needed: a general store, a stable, and no sheriff asking questions. They sold the extra horses and gear, keeping only what they needed. The store owner, a German named Holtzmann, didn't ask where they'd come from or where they were going. Frontier courtesy. Everyone had secrets. Clara picked out supplies with careful economy, while Elias arranged for fresh horses. When he found her, she was holding a bolt of calico, running her fingers over the pattern. "For a dress," she said, almost shy. "I've nothing but these men's clothes." "Get it," he said. Get whatever you need. We have to save money." "We have enough, and you deserve something pretty after all this." Her smile transformed her face, years dropping away. For a moment he saw the girl she might have been, before life hardened her. They stayed above the stable that night, in a room barely big enough for the straw mattress. But it was warm and dry, and no one was hunting them. Clara curled against him, humming softly. "What's that tune?" "Something my mother used to sing before—" She trailed off. "Sing it for me." She did, voice soft and true. A lullaby about birds returning in spring, about hope renewed. Elias closed his eyes and let the music wash over him, feeling something inside that had been clenched for years finally begin to ease. In the morning, they pushed on, following the wagon road west. Other travelers passed them now, freight wagons, families in covered wagons, lone riders on mysterious errands. Clara had fashioned herself a bonnet from scraps, hiding her face when strangers passed. "No one's looking at us," Elias told her. "We're just another couple heading west. Old habits," she said, but she relaxed slightly. They were 5 days out of the mountains when they saw the riders coming hard from behind. Elias's hand found his rifle, but Clara stopped him. "Wait, look." It wasn't hunters. It was a cavalry patrol, blue uniforms dusty from hard riding. The sergeant leading them slowed as he approached, hand raised in greeting. "Morning, folks. Seen any Indian sign?" "Some," Elias admitted. "Few days back in the high country. Hunting party, looked like—" "Any trouble?" "Not for us." The sergeant nodded. "Got reports of attacks on travelers. 3 men killed up near South Pass." Clara's hand found Elias's, squeezed tight. The sergeant didn't notice, focused on his mission. "You folks heading to Fort Bridger?" "Eventually," Elias said. "Maybe California after that. Good farming in California, they say, though it's getting crowded. Oregon might be better for folks wanting space." "We like space," Clara said quietly. The sergeant touched his hat. "Well, safe travels. Keep your eyes open and your powder dry." The patrol thundered on, leaving dust in the air. Elias and Clara sat their horses, watching them go. "They didn't even ask our names." Clara marveled. "Why would they? We're nobody. Just another couple among thousands heading west. Nobody." She tested the word, smiled. "I like being nobody. Nobody with you." They reached Fort Bridger a week later. The first real settlement they'd seen. It bustled with activity, soldiers, traders, emigrants preparing for the final push west. They resupplied quickly, Elias trading pelts he'd kept for necessities. In the sutler's store, while Clara examined goods. The clerk tried to make conversation. "You folks settling hereabouts?" "Passing through," Elias said shortly. "Shame. Good land here. Course, good land in Oregon, too." "That where you're headed?" "Maybe." The clerk leaned in confidentially. "Word of advice. Friend. Stay clear of southern Oregon for now. Range war brewing down there. Cattlemen and farmers going at it. Blood's already been spilled. North Oregon, then. Now you're talking. Willamette Valley's filling up, but there's still good claims to be had, especially for folks willing to work. That night they camped outside town, preferring open sky to crowded boarding houses. Clara worked on the dress she'd started, fingers nimble with needle and thread. "Never thought I'd be sewing my own wedding dress on the trail to Oregon," she said. "That what it is? A wedding dress? Well, we ought to make it official sometime, don't you think? Unless—" She looked up, suddenly uncertain. "Unless you've changed your mind. About us." Elias pulled her close. "Fabric and needles forgotten." "Never, but are you sure? Life with me won't be easy. I'm set in my ways. Not much for socializing. And I still wake up screaming sometimes. And I still flinch when men raise their voices. Still go cold when someone looks at me too long." She cupped his scarred face. "We're a matched set, you and I, broken in complementary ways." "That what we are? Broken?" "Healing," she corrected. "Slowly, together." He kissed her then, long and deep, and they made love under the stars with her half-finished dress as a blanket. Afterward, they lay entwined, watching the constellations wheel overhead. "There," Clara pointed, "the North Star. Constant, reliable. Like you." She laughed. "I'm many things, Elias Morgan, but constant isn't one of them. I've been servant, prisoner, prostitute, runaway. And now what? Pioneer? Wife-to-be. Survivor," he said. "That's the constant. You survive. We survive," she corrected. "That's the difference now." A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. The sound should have been lonely, but instead, it seemed like a celebration. Wild voices raised to the night. "Tell me we'll make it," Clara whispered. "Tell me we'll have that farm, that life. We'll make it. Promise?" "I promise." "Liar," she said fondly. "You can't promise that." "Then I promise to try. Every day, with everything I've got. That enough?" "More than enough." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other in dreams of Oregon. Behind them, their past receded with each mile. Ahead, the future waited, uncertain but their own. The thin man was dead. The hunters scattered. The mountains crossed. Now there was just the trail, the journey, and each other. It was, Elias thought as sleep took him, more than he'd ever dared hope for. And for Clara, who'd walked barefoot through a blizzard on faith alone, it was the beginning of everything. The trail to Oregon stretched before them like a dusty promise. They joined a small wagon train outside Fort Bridger. Just 4 families willing to take on late-season travelers. The wagon master, a weathered man named Josiah Briggs, looked them over with shrewd eyes. "You're traveling light for settlers," he observed. "We travel fast," Elias replied. "Don't need much. Got money for the ferry crossings, food to last 6 weeks." "We do," Briggs nodded. "We leave at dawn. Keep up or get left behind. And mister," he glanced at Clara, "keep your woman close. Trail's full of rough men." Clara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing until Briggs moved on. "Keep your woman close," she muttered. "Like I'm a sheep that might stray. He means well. They always mean well." But she smiled, taking the sting from the words. At least we're Mr. and Mrs. Nobody on the Oregon Trail now. They fell into the rhythm of trail life. Early starts, long dusty days, circles of wagons at night. The other families kept their distance at first, suspicious of newcomers. But Clara had a way of making herself useful that slowly won them over. She helped with children, shared their meager medical supplies, showed the younger women tricks for making tough meat tender. "You're good at this," Elias told her one evening as she helped deliver a baby for one of the families. "At what?" "Being part of things, making community." She wiped sweat from her forehead, cradling the newborn before passing it to its mother. "I spent so long on the outside looking in. Maybe I just remember what it feels like to need kindness." 3 weeks into the journey, they reached the Green River, The crossing was treacherous, water running high from mountain snowmelt. The first wagon made it across, but the second got stuck midstream, water threatening to sweep it away. Without thinking, Elias spurred his horse into the current. The water was shockingly cold, the force of it tremendous. He reached the wagon just as it began to tip, grabbed the lead oxen's yoke, and added his horse's strength to theirs. "Pull!" he shouted to the driver. "Now!" Together they hauled the wagon to safety, but not before Elias took a blow from a floating log that opened a gash on his shoulder. Clara was waiting on the bank with bandages, face white but hands steady. "Fool man," she said as she wrapped the wound. "Trying to be a hero." "Wasn't trying, just doing what needed done." That's what heroes always say. The wagon train's attitude toward them changed after that. They were no longer strangers, but part of the group, woven into the fabric of shared danger and mutual aid. Around the campfires, people began to ask about their plans. Farming, Elias would say, would find some good land, build a house, raise crops. And children, Clara added one night, then blushed as if the words had escaped without permission. Elias looked at her across the fire. They'd never discussed children. It had seemed too much to hope for when they were running for their lives. But now, children would be good, he said quietly, and her smile lit up the darkness. They were 2 weeks from Oregon when trouble found them again. Not hunters this time, but nature itself. Storm clouds built all day, and by evening the sky had turned an ominous green-black. "Tornado weather," Briggs announced. "Find low ground and pray." They scattered, each family seeking what shelter they could. Elias and Clara ended up in a buffalo wallow with a young couple whose baby Clara had helped deliver. The wind rose to a shriek, and then the world went mad. The tornado passed within 100 yards, its roar like 1,000 freight trains. Wagons flew through the air like toys. Oxen bellowed in terror. Clara pressed her face against Elias's chest as he sheltered her with his body, both of them certain these were their last moments. Then, as suddenly as it came, it passed. They emerged to devastation. 2 wagons destroyed, oxen scattered or dead, supplies strewn across miles of prairie. But miraculously, no people killed, though several were injured. "We can't go on like this," one man said, looking at his smashed wagon. "We're ruined." "No one's ruined." Clara spoke up. "We share what we have, rebuild what we can. That's what families do." It took 3 days to salvage what they could, fashion makeshift repairs, round up surviving animals. Clara worked tirelessly, organizing, encouraging, nursing the injured. Elias had never loved her more than when he saw her helping a despairing woman gather her scattered belongings, saying, "I've lost everything before. You survive it. You go on. Let me show you how." They limped into Oregon territory 2 weeks later, battered but alive. At the settlement of Cascade Falls, the wagon train dispersed, each family heading for their chosen land. Briggs shook Elias's hand, then surprised him by embracing Clara. "You've got a good woman there, Morgan. She's got steel in her spine." "Don't I know it?" They spent a week in Cascade Falls, recovering, resupplying, gathering information about available land. It was there, in the small clapboard church, that they finally made it official. The ceremony was simple, just them, the preacher, and 2 witnesses pulled from the street. Clara wore the calico dress she'd finished on the trail, wildflowers in her hair. Elias had cleaned up as best he could, even trimmed his beard. "Do you, Elias Morgan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." The words came out rough with emotion. "Do you, Clara Hensley, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Clear and certain. "Then, by the power vested in me by God and the territory of Oregon, I pronounce you man and wife." They kissed there in the simple church, sunlight streaming through plain glass windows, and Elias felt something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly. He'd known too much violence for easy peace, but a kind of rightness. This woman, this moment, this new beginning. They found their land 30 miles south of town. 160 acres in a valley with good water and soil that crumbled rich and dark in the hand. The previous claimant had given up after one winter, leaving behind a half-built cabin and cleared fields, already going back to wild. It's perfect, Clara breathed, standing in what would be their dooryard. Look, there's even apple trees. Someone planted apple trees. Going to take work to make it livable. Everything good takes work. She turned to him, eyes bright. Our home, Elias, our actual home. They threw themselves into the labor with will born of desperation and hope. Elias finished the cabin, thinking it with moss, building furniture from logs. Clara attacked the garden plot, coaxing vegetables from soil that hadn't been worked in years. They acquired chickens from a neighbor, a milk cow from another, slowly building the foundation of a working farm. The first months were harder than either anticipated. They discovered the previous owner had left because of conflicts with the local cattle baron, Samuel Morrison, who considered the whole valley his personal range. Morrison's men drove cattle across their fields, tore down fences, made threats. We could move, Clara said one night after finding their newly planted corn trampled. Find somewhere else. No more running. Elias said firmly, This is our land. We stand our ground. The confrontation came on a hot August day. Morrison himself rode up with 6 men, all armed. Elias met them in the yard, rifle in hand but not pointed. Clara watched from the doorway. You're Morgan, Morrison said. It wasn't a question. I am. This land's no good for farming. Best you move on before you lose more than crops. It's good enough for us. Morrison leaned forward in his saddle. I'm trying to be neighborly here. This valley's been open range for 20 years. Farmers just complicate things. Then things are about to get complicated. One of Morrison's men went for his gun, but Morrison stopped him with a gesture. His eyes had found Clara in the doorway, taken in the shotgun she held casual but ready. Your woman looks familiar, Morrison said slowly. She from around here? My wife is from wherever I'm from, Elias replied. That's all that matters. Interesting. Morrison's smile was cold. Well, Morgan, you've been warned. What happens next is on your head. They rode off, but Elias knew it wasn't over. That night, he and Clara sat planning, preparing for what would come. I brought this trouble, Clara said. He recognized me, or thinks he did. Doesn't matter. Trouble would have come anyway. Men like Morrison. They always push until someone pushes back. And we're going to push back. We are. The attack started small. Cut fences, poisoned water holes, shots fired at night to spook the stock. Elias repaired damage, set watches, returned fire when necessary. Clara turned their cabin into a fortress. Barrels of water against fire, shutters reinforced, ammunition sorted and ready. They weren't alone. Other small farmers in the valley had suffered Morrison's tactics for years. Slowly, carefully. Elias organized them. Not a war, he'd seen enough of war, but a legal resistance. They filed complaints, documented damage, demanded law enforcement. The new territorial judge, recently arrived from San Francisco, had no ties to Morrison. When he finally held hearings, the evidence was overwhelming. Morrison was forced to pay damages, to respect property lines, to acknowledge that the age of open range was ending. You've made an enemy, the judge warned Elias privately. Morrison's not the forgiving type. Neither am I. Elias replied. But as autumn turned the valley gold, an uneasy peace held. The harvest was good. Corn and wheat, vegetables for canning, apples from the neglected trees Clara had nursed back to health. They worked side by side through the shortening days, laying up stores for winter. We did it, Clara said one evening, surveying their filled barn and cellar. We actually did it. First year's the hardest, they say. Was it harder than you expected? Elias considered. Different hard. In the mountains. It was just me against the winter. Here, it's us against the world. Higher stakes. But better odds, Clara said, taking his hand. 2 against the world beats 1 against winter. That night, as they lay in their bed, their real bed in their real home, Clara told him what she'd suspected for weeks. "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the darkness, momentous as mountains. Elias couldn't speak, could barely breathe. A child. Their child. New life in this new land. "Say something," Clara whispered. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "Scared," he managed. "Happy, terrified, all of it at once." "Me too," she laughed softly. "But isn't that how all the best things feel?" Winter came gentle that year, snow falling soft and not too deep. They spent the quiet months preparing, Elias building a cradle and tiny furniture, Clara sewing small clothes and blankets. Neighbors stopped by with advice and hand-me-downs, weaving them deeper into the community fabric. "You've changed," Clara told him one snowy evening as he worked on the cradle. "You smile more, talk more. You changed me." "No." She shook her head. "I just reminded you who you were before the war, before the grief." Maybe that's the same thing. She considered this, hand resting on her growing belly. Maybe it is. Morrison made no more trouble that winter, though they sometimes saw his riders on the ridge, watching. Elias knew the fight wasn't over, might never be truly over, but for now, in this season of waiting, there was peace. As Clara's time grew near, fear crept in. The nearest doctor was a day's ride away. They'd have to depend on a midwife from town, if she could make it in time. All the things that could go wrong haunted Elias's dreams. "Stop fretting," Clara told him. "Women have been doing this since Eve. I'm strong. I know, but I've lost—" "I'm not Martha," she said gently. "This isn't Ohio. We're not them. This is our story, not a repeat of theirs." She was right, he knew. But knowing and feeling were different things. As winter gave way to spring and Clara grew heavy with child, Elias found himself praying for the first time since Sarah died. Not to the God of his childhood, exactly, but to whatever force had brought Clara to his door that snowy night. "Let her live," he prayed. "Let them both live. Let us have this chance at happiness." The valley burst into bloom, wild roses and lupines, apple blossoms like snow. Their fields showed green with new growth. Life surged everywhere. Impossible to deny. And in their small cabin at the edge of the wilderness, two people who'd found each other against all odds waited for their own new beginning, their own spring after the longest winter. The baby came with the spring floods, when the creek ran high and the road to town was impassable. Clara's pain started at dawn, and by noon it was clear the midwife wouldn't make it in time. It would be just them, as it had been from the beginning. Elias had delivered calves and foals, but this was different. This was Clara, gripping his hand hard enough to break bones, her face twisted with effort and pain. This was their child fighting to enter the world. "I can't," she gasped between contractions. "It's too much." "You can," he said, though fear clawed at his throat. "You're the strongest person I know. You walked through a blizzard barefoot to find me. You can do this." Hour by hour, the labor progressed. Elias did what he could, boiled water, prepared clean cloths, whispered encouragement, but mostly he was just there, an anchor for Clara to hold on to as her body did its ancient work. When the sun was setting, painting their cabin walls gold, their daughter finally arrived. She came into the world angry, red-faced and squalling, tiny fists waving at the indignity of it all. "A girl," Elias breathed, cutting the cord with shaking hands. "Clara, we have a daughter." Clara, exhausted but radiant, reached for the baby. As she cradled their daughter to her chest, tears streamed down both their faces. The infant quieted, turning toward her mother's warmth. And in that moment, Elias felt his heart crack open and rebuild itself around these two souls. "What should we name her?" Clara asked softly. Elias thought of the daughter he'd lost, of honoring the past without being chained to it. "Sarah," he said, "for remembrance, but also hope. Sarah Hope Morgan." "Sarah Hope," Clara repeated, "for what was and what will be." The midwife arrived the next day, clucking over them like a worried hen, but mother and baby were fine. thriving even. Word spread through the valley. The Morgans had a daughter. Neighbors came with gifts and food, celebrating new life in a hard land. Morrison came too, surprisingly, with his wife. She was a faded woman who looked at Clara with knowing eyes. Childbirth's the great equalizer. Mrs., Morrison said quietly while the men talked outside. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor when you're bringing life into the world. No, Clara agreed, adjusting Sarah's blanket. It doesn't, Mrs. Morrison leaned closer. My husband's not a bad man, just set in his ways, but times are changing, maybe. She glanced toward the door. Maybe children change things. It was as close to an olive branch as they'd get. Clara took it, inviting Mrs. Morrison to hold Sarah. The older woman's face softened as she cradled the baby. And for a moment, the feuds and boundaries of the valley seemed very small. But peace in the valley didn't mean their past was forgotten. When Sarah was 3 months old, a letter arrived from Missouri. Clara's hands shook as she opened it. Elias standing close. It was from a lawyer. Mrs. Richardson had died, and in her final illness, she'd confessed to fabricating evidence against Clara. The charges had been dropped. Clara was free to return to Missouri if she wished. Her name cleared. Clara read the letter twice, then fed it to the fire. No looking back? Elias asked. Nothing there I want. Clara said simply, everything I need is here. They were working in the garden that afternoon, Sarah sleeping in a basket in the shade, when riders approached. Not Morrison's men this time, strangers, travel-worn and grim. Elias counted 6 of them, and his hand drifted to the rifle leaning against the fence. Help you, gentlemen? The lead rider, a man with a marshal's badge, dismounted slowly, looking for someone. Woman named Clara Hensley. Heard she might have passed this way. Clara straightened from the beans she'd been picking, dirt on her hands and knees. I'm Clara Morgan, she said clearly. Have been for over a year now. The marshal studied her, then Elias, then the baby in the basket. There's still the matter of a dead man in Missouri, ma'am. There's a letter from Mrs. Richardson's lawyer in town. Elias said, clears my wife of all charges. You're welcome to read it. Already did. That's not why we're here. The marshal's weathered face creased in what might have been sympathy. The dead man, Richardson, had a brother. He's not satisfied with legal clearings, says he wants justice done personal. Clara went very still. And you're what, his hunting dogs? No, ma'am. We're here to tell you he's coming. Maybe already on his way. Man's got money, influence. We can't stop him from traveling, but thought you should know. Why warn us? Elias asked. Suspicious. The marshal glanced at the baby again. Got a daughter myself, and I looked into what happened in Missouri. What that family did to you, ma'am? He shook his head. Wasn't right. Consider this a professional courtesy. After they left, Elias and Clara stood in their garden, the implication of the warning settling over them like shadow. We could run again, Clara said quietly. No. Elias's voice was firm as granite. This is our home, Sarah's home. We make our stand here. They prepared as they had before, but differently now. They had more to lose, more to protect. The neighbors, having seen the marshals, came to offer support. Even Morrison sent word. Outsiders threatening valley folks was different than local disputes. 2 weeks passed in tense normalcy. They worked their fields, tended their stock, cared for their daughter, but always watching, always ready. Richardson's brother arrived on a Tuesday morning with 4 hired guns. They didn't try subtlety, riding straight to the farm. Elias met them in the yard, but this time he wasn't alone. 5 neighboring farmers stood with him, rifles visible but not raised. Thomas Richardson, the lead man announced. He looked like his brother, soft and cruel around the edges. I've come for the woman who murdered my brother. Your brother died of a weak heart while attacking my wife. Elias said calmly. Even your sister-in-law admitted the truth before she died. My sister-in-law was addled, manipulated. I want justice. From the cabin doorway, Clara emerged, not hiding this time, not running. She carried Sarah on her hip, the baby gurgling happily, unaware of the danger. "Mr. Richardson," Clara said, voice carrying clear across the yard. "I'm sorry for your loss, but your brother was not a good man. He hurt me and would have done worse. I defended myself. Nothing more." Richardson's face flushed. "Lies. My brother was—" "Your brother was a man who forced himself on servants." Clara interrupted. "Everyone in that house knew it. Your sister-in-law knew it. You knew it. But it was easier to blame the victim than face the truth about your family." "How dare you?" "I dare because I'm done being afraid. I have a husband who loves me, a daughter who needs me, and neighbors who stand by me. I have a life worth fighting for now." She shifted Sarah to her other hip. "So if you came here for revenge, know this: you'll have to go through all of us. And even if you succeed, you'll only prove what everyone already knows. That the Richardson men are exactly what they've always been, cowards who prey on those weaker than themselves." The silence stretched taut. Richardson's men shifted nervously, clearly unprepared for united resistance. They'd expected to find a frightened woman alone, not a community ready to fight. "Finally," Richardson spoke, his voice thick with rage. "This isn't over." "Yes," Elias said quietly. "It is. You'll leave now. You'll go back to Missouri. And if you're smart, you'll let the dead bury the dead. Your brother's gone. Nothing you do here will bring him back. All you'll accomplish is creating more widows, more orphans. Is that the legacy you want?" For a moment, violence trembled on the edge of erupting. Then Morrison and 6 of his cowboys appeared on the ridge, watching, not taking sides exactly, but making their presence known. Outsiders threatening valley folk was one thing, starting a war was another. Richardson looked around, at the farmers ready to fight, at Morrison's men on the ridge, at Clara standing fierce and unafraid with her baby. Something in his face crumbled. "My brother wasn't—" He stopped, swallowed. "He wasn't a good man, I know that, but he was blood. And blood matters," Clara said more gently. "I understand that, but your brother's choices were his own. His death was his own doing. Don't add to the tragedy by making the same mistakes." Richardson sat his horse for a long moment, then nodded once, sharply. Without another word, he turned and rode away, his men following. They didn't look back. The neighbors lingered, making sure the threat was really gone. Morrison himself rode down, tipping his hat to Clara. "Brave thing you did, ma'am. Stupid, maybe, but brave." "Sometimes they're the same thing," Clara replied. Morrison almost smiled. "Maybe so. Your fence lines. We'll respect them. Man's got a right to farm his land if he's willing to fight for it." It was as close to peace as they'd get. Morrison rode off. The neighbors dispersed, and the Morgans were left standing in their yard, holding each other and their daughter. "Is it really over?" Clara asked that night as they lay in bed, Sarah sleeping between them. "That part is, there'll be other challenges, always are, but Richardson won't be back." "How do you know?" Saw it in his eyes at the end. He knew the truth about his brother, probably always had. Sometimes admitting the truth is harder than seeking revenge. Clara was quiet for a moment. "I feel sorry for him. Living with that knowledge, that shame." "You've got a bigger heart than me." "No, just a different kind of hurt." She touched Sarah's sleeping face. "But it's healing. Every day with you. With her, it heals a little more." Spring turned to summer, summer to fall. Their crops flourished. Sarah grew strong and bright, and the valley settled into a new rhythm. The Morgans were part of it now, woven into the fabric of community. Clara helped deliver babies and tend the sick. Elias served on the town council, helping shape laws for a changing territory. On Sarah's first birthday, they held a celebration. The whole valley came, even Morrison and his wife. Gifts piled high, hand-carved toys, preserved foods, a quilt made by the church ladies. Sarah, walking now on unsteady legs. Charmed everyone with her green eyes and ready smile. She has your spirit, Elias told Clara as they watched their daughter play, and your stubbornness. Clara replied, Lord help us when she's older. That night, after the guests had gone and Sarah slept, they sat on their porch watching the stars. The mountains rose dark against the sky, eternal and unchanging. But the valley below showed lights from a dozen farms now. Progress, civilization, community. Do you miss it? Clara asked suddenly. The solitude, the silence? Elias considered. 10 years alone in the mountains seemed like another lifetime now. That man, closed off, frozen, hiding from life, was a stranger. No, he said finally. I had silence for 10 years. Now I have Sarah's laughter and your singing and neighbors arguing about fence lines. It's messier, but it's living. And the ghosts? Still there, always will be. But they're quieter now, outnumbered by the living. Clara stood, pulling him up with her. Come to bed, husband. Tomorrow we start clearing the south field. Expanding already? Well, Sarah will need a brother or sister eventually, and they'll all need land of their own someday. All? How many children are you planning, woman? As many as we're blessed with. She smiled, that fierce, beautiful smile that had first caught his heart. We've got love enough for an army. They went inside, to their bed, to their life. Outside, the mountains stood guard as they always had, but inside the small cabin, love had built something stronger than stone, warmer than any fire. From the woman who'd arrived barefoot in a blizzard to the mother standing fearless before armed men. From the man hiding from the world to the husband and father building a future. They'd traveled far, these two, not just in miles, but in heart. And their journey was really just beginning. In the years that would follow, the Morgan farm would prosper. 3 more children would join Sarah, 2 boys and another girl. The valley would grow into a proper town, with Elias serving as mayor twice and Clara starting the first school. They'd face droughts and floods, economic panics and personal losses, but they'd face them together, feet firmly planted on their land. Sometimes, on winter nights when the snow fell heavy, Clara would still go barefoot to the door, standing for a moment with her toes in the cold, remembering, honoring the desperate girl who'd walked through hell to find heaven. What are you doing? Elias would ask, though he knew. Remembering I'm alive. She'd answer, remembering I'm home, and she was. They both were. Home at last, after the longest journey. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope you enjoyed following Elias and Clara's journey from that snowy night to their hard-won happiness. Where are you listening to this story? Leave a comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, courage, and survival from America's frontier days. Share your thoughts about Clara and Elias. What part of their story touched you most? Until next time, partners, keep your fires burning and your hearts open. Happy trails.